Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Activision, Blizzard, and the future of Activision, Blizzard, World of Warcraft, and Overwatch. I make this video motivated in large part by a supposed leak that was posted on MMO-Champion. A leak that many people have dismissed as fake news, if you will. Not certainly what I'm going to call it, fake news. Because although there are certainly some things that make sense that are part of this supposed leak, other things not so much. But it certainly presents an interesting topic of conversation. What is Activision going to do with Blizzard given all the issues that Blizzard has? And I'm not just talking here about the lawsuit, which apparently the issues that existed in Blizzard, the discrimination, the harassment, they were being kept from Activision. Like, people didn't apparently inform Activision until long after it had happened because they didn't want to draw the eye of Sauron, so to speak. Now Activision is probably really pissed that they're having to deal with it. And at some point, maybe not in the timeline that is presented as part of this supposed leak, but at some point Activision might just conclude, what's the damn point in keeping Blizzard around? Their IPs are valuable. The company, given everything that's happened, maybe not so much. I mean, they've lost sponsors, their business relationships have been affected, their stock value has been affected. At what point does Activision just shut down Blizzard? Because they certainly can. Now, with the leak, Blizzard Entertainment is being dissolved early 2022. It is going to be replaced by a new team called Insight that will be a more direct part of the renamed Activision Insight. Much of Blizzard, though not all, will be sacked and replaced with new employees for Insight. Well, I could certainly see Blizzard being shut down, but there's two things that I want to comment on. One, sure, Activision could decide to rename itself from Activision Blizzard to Activision Insight, but couldn't they just go back to calling themselves, I don't know, just Activision? Just an idea. They could possibly do that. And, you know, if they want to go with Insight, if they want to have that kind of longer name, because Activision, handles Call of Duty and a couple of other things, if they want to have, like, that name for the bigger company, sure, that could work. Just a question there. I could certainly see them shutting down Blizzard. Whether or not they would fire a whole number of developers or people from Blizzard is a whole other discussion. How many people are we talking about? I mean, if you're telling me most of them, the vast majority of them, I do not believe that. If you're telling me some of them, maybe. Especially if they're just getting rid of, say, the World of Warcraft team, which has produced disaster after disaster. Let's be clear on this. The piss-poor state of World of Warcraft isn't down to corporate decisions, or purely corporate decision. I'm sure they may have had a hand in some of the decisions that were made, but a lot of the decisions are down to the people that actually make the game. So if World of Warcraft isn't doing so great, firing many of those people or replacing them may make some sense. But here's the thing, developers don't grow on trees. And I'm sure there's plenty of people, talented developers in Blizzard that worked and still work on World of Warcraft that had very little to do with the piss-poor handling of Shadowlands or Classic TBC. Many of the poor decisions that Blizzard has made over the years, especially with retail World of Warcraft. So that's something to be seen if there is any truth to this leak. I would be shocked if Activision isn't considering its options. Like, if you think there aren't discussions in Activision about what they're going to do in the future, what they're going to do with Blizzard, how they're going to handle that, well, they just replaced the person at the top. They put two people there. One is a Mythic 20 raider, dungeon player, and the other person apparently has a good history of handling these kind of issues, the issues that Blizzard is dealing with right now in the industry. So it would not make quite as much sense to then just say, oh, we're going to fire most people. Renaming the company, sure, I could buy that. Renaming the company, I could accept that. Firing most people, or much of the company, that makes less sense to me. Then the post continues. Diablo is considered by far the most promising franchise at the present. Diablo 4 has 3 planned expansions, a remake of the original Diablo is in the works. Diablo Immortal will receive a PC and console release a year after its mobile release. An untitled Diablo PvP game will begin development under his site. The Diablo team, like the Hearthstone team, will be mostly unaffected by the company shifts. Now, some people may call into question whether or not Diablo is the most promising franchise, but looking at the reaction people have had over Diablo 2 Resurrected, and honestly, even at Diablo 3, yeah, it launched in a really, really horrible state, but unlike, say, World of Warcraft, which has been one horrible launch after another, Diablo 3 has kind of redeemed itself by now. I mean, it was too little too late in a way to really get to the player base that it needed, but Diablo certainly is in a much better state than many other IPs that Blizzard has right now. It is in a genre where there is a great deal of interest right now. And so, would Diablo be the most promising intellectual property that Blizzard has right now, with the least amount of issues? Yeah, I can absolutely see that. And I think it is pretty telling, though, that it isn't Blizzard working on Diablo 2 Resurrected. Well, not directly. They might have oversight over the whole project, but it is another company doing that. That should tell you something, by the way. And Diablo 2 Resurrected, unlike Warcraft 3 Reforged, seems to look very promising. Though something could be said about the fact that Warcraft 3 Reforged was promising more of a remake in some ways, as opposed to just a remastered with fancy new graphics. But that's a whole discussion in its own right. Either way, Diablo looks to be in a good spot. Though, call me skeptical over how Diablo 4 will be, but we shall see how that goes down. But certainly, despite the massive negative reaction over Diablo Immortal, Diablo is in a better spot than many other games. It's not necessarily that it's in a great spot. No. It isn't in the best of spots. No, let's just say Diablo Immortal hangs over the company. But compared to, say, StarCraft or Overwatch or other games, and compared to World of Warcraft, yeah, it's in a really good state. Moving on with World of Warcraft is entering official maintenance mode. The little work that was already put into the expansion that was supposed to come after Shadowlands, that's how I'm reading this, will be released 9.3 sometime in 2023. 9.3, despite the name, has nothing to do with Shadowlands and is just made up of salvage stuff from 10.0. Wouldn't that make more sense late 2022? But either way, moving on. Classic servers will be merged into 1 or 2 with the launch of Wrath of Lich King Classic in 2023. This will be the last Classic expansion planned. Okay, on this subject, as many issues as World of Warcraft retail has, and they are legion, for all the lack of subscribers that it currently has, for the massive drop-off in the player base, for all the issues Burning Crusade Classic has as well, let me just make a point that people shouldn't forget. People have accused me of wanting to bash Blizzard, and believe me, there's a lot of things to scream at Blizzard for the poor state of World of Warcraft and Classic at the moment, but Shadowlands was the second best-selling PC game of all time, second only to Cyberpunk. If you think that World of Warcraft is worth abandoning for maybe some other project, which is what the league also talks about, then maybe. But I find it very doubtful that Activision would just decide to abandon World of Warcraft. Look, it might be that they're looking in the future. It might be that they're thinking, okay, Shadowlands sold well, but its players base is going kaput. There's other MMOs out on their market that are getting a lot of interest. New World, Lost Ark, Ashes of Creation. There's other games, right? Shadowlands may have been the last good breath of WoW, and they might be thinking, no other expansion that we're going to release from this point is going to have the same success. But if you're telling me that Activision is going to decide to not launch another expansion in World of Warcraft, I am highly skeptical of that statement. Then there's also the discussion about Classic. Wrath of the Lich King Classic being the last Classic expansion, sure, I can accept that, I can buy that. Maybe. Though I think there would be some value in making Cataclysm Classic, but that's a whole discussion in its own right. That said, That said, let me just say this. As someone who's played Classic and Classic TBC, the idea that they would just go down to 2 servers for the launch of Wrath the Lich King Classic, that is pure fucking nonsense. Like, I could just dismiss this entire post as being complete and utter rubbish based on that statement alone. I don't think anyone in Blizzard is that delusional to think that they could just fit the entire Classic player base of Wrath, which is one of the most popular expansions in the history of World of Warcraft, on 2 servers. To give you an idea of what 2 servers would mean, they would need to have 1 server would mean that the player base of current Classic, with all the issues TBC has, would mean that the player base of Classic would go down to 1/30th the size, assuming that the server is about 10k active raiders. 1/30th the size. And what, we're looking at 1/10th, 1/20th, with 2 servers, something along those lines. The idea that Classic would have such a massive drop-off, well, that would be a disaster to begin with. And you're not going to see that with Wrath. Regardless of how I personally feel about Wrath the Lich King, I can expect Wrath the Lich King to have a great deal of players on launch. Or it should have. If it doesn't, then that's a major disaster. Burn Crusade having issues because of a June launch and all the shit that they've done, one thing. Wrath the Lich King falling on its face, that is completely different. Let me make this clear. Of all the expansions on private servers, because we can use that data, Wrath of the Lich King is the most popular by far. You may not have had the massive server like Nostalrius, but Nostalrius was the exception rather than the rule. The rule is Wrath is generally the most popular expansion on private servers. It's the one a lot of people have, an enormous number of people have a far bigger interest in than TBC or even vanilla. So if you're telling me, oh, we're going to fit all of that in 1-2 merge servers, yeah, that is just pure bullshit, the way I'm reading that. But it could be that that World of Warcraft might enter maintenance mode, might be abandoned, might just be, the servers keep going. But yeah, the person who wrote this either is trolling or has no idea what they're saying. If this is actually how people think in Blizzard, then I'd be completely shocked if it was. Then I guess we shouldn't wonder why Blizzard is going to shit if this is something that they actually think. But again, this is likely fake news, and we shouldn't take it with, we shouldn't believe that it has any value whatsoever. And on top of that, a new untitled World of Warcraft successor MMORPG is in the works, looking to take a lot from Final Fantasy XIV. You know Final Fantasy XIV, which took a lot from World of Warcraft to begin with, but okay. This is going to be developed by a majority new team than those who made and worked on WoW. It is not a sequel, but a total reboot with new lore. Currently only in the planning stage, the base game will focus on Valences, the Eastern Kingdoms, and Outland, with playable races from both worlds. It is currently believed to not have factions. It will not borrow from Hearthstone, which will remain separate and continually updated with new expansions. And more on World of Warcraft. A Warcraft mobile MMORPG project has been in the works since 2019 and will continue under its site, focusing on drawing in an audience in China. Is separate from the new PC MMORPG. The last report said it was canon to WoW, though it is unknown whether this will change with WoW entering maintenance mode. And finally, a Hearthstone spin-off game is coming out. It is going to build off the auto battler modes added. On the idea of Blizzard, on that topic, them shutting down WoW to make a new MMORPG. Again, I don't see them shutting down WoW and refusing to add expansions, but them deciding to, oh, here's a new team, here's a big budget, make a new successor MMORPG to World of Warcraft with new lore, but kind of based on things that already existed with Outland and Eastern Kingdoms. I could conceivably see that happening, like a complete reboot of Warcraft. I could see that happening. I think there would be a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot of problems in the Warcraft lore right now because they just have to keep adding stuff, and it just ends up being a huge fucking mess as a result of it. So I could see a reboot working completely, a complete reboot, a new game, going from scratch with a new team could very well work, be very successful. And the developers of World of Warcraft have certainly made huge mistakes. And whether or not you want to trust them, well, maybe Activision decides that it doesn't want to trust the guys currently working on World of Warcraft to make a new MMORPG. That's one way of viewing it. As for a mobile game in China, okay, fine. Capture the Chinese market, do it. Hearthstone continuing. Yeah, Hearthstone is not a big story, I guess. It's not the biggest game that they care about. But just leave Hearthstone as it is. It's fine as it is, right? Just leave it as it is, leave it going, and it will probably continue doing decently. Or, well, it's never going to be the biggest thing in the world, but it isn't something that has major issues right now. And then there is Overwatch. Overwatch is believed to be unsalvageable, failing to capture any modern interest. Overwatch 2 has been cancelled, as have multiple smaller mobile projects set in the same universe. Overwatch in late 2022 will receive the maps and heroes planned for Overwatch 2, but not the PvE modes. A Netflix original series is in the works and seems unaffected by these cancellations. StarCraft is completely abandoned in any way, shape, or form. There are no plans for new RTS or MOBA of any kind. So, with respect to Overwatch 2 being cancelled, I'm of two minds on that. On one hand, Blizzard has obviously put a lot of effort into making the content of Overwatch 2. In fact, the game is ready. What they need to do right now, and would be ready for release in 2022, the issue is they have to consider rebalancing the heroes, or rebalancing the game. They have to start working on that. That's why we've seen reports of them delaying the release of Overwatch 2, if it ever were to come out, until 2023. Now, I feel that would be a disaster in its own right, but that's what the current news is. But interest in Overwatch has certainly dropped by a significant amount, and the thing about Overwatch 2 is, yeah, you have all that new PvE stuff, but what are you going to change to multiplayer, right? Oh, we're adding a few new modes, or 1-2 new modes, some new heroes. It's like, that's not good enough. And this is what you get with a company like Blizzard. This is actually one of the issues. They've been so obsessed over just adding stuff on top of their games, and that just is no longer really going to be workable, I feel, for Overwatch. Like, multiplayer is the big part of that. It's not going to be in a good state if that's all they're going to do with it. Quite frankly, it's really not going to be in a good state. The esports scene of Overwatch is shrinking, the player base of Overwatch is shrinking, and if we have to wait until 2023, as some reports, some credible reports to be clear on this, have suggested, then it's just not going to be in a good state by that point. And the PvE modes and the PvE modes are just not going to be enough to fix that. That's the problem. That's one of the first problems, or the biggest problem with Overwatch. Could Activision just decide, oh yeah, okay, add whatever content you have, or the PvP content, the multiplayer content you have, but forget the PvE modes? Maybe this report, like, if there's any validity to this report, I don't think that they would necessarily cancel the idea of adding those PvE modes. I think they would certainly charge people for them. In which case, why not just launch Overwatch 2? But yeah, things are now looking good for Overwatch, and maybe they would make that decision, or maybe not. And finally, because their franchises and lead characters like Sylvanas, Tracer, and Kerrigan no longer capture people's imaginations like they used to, there has been a lot of work done on developing a new IP. After 3 canceled projects, they have one they've been working on since early 2020, set in a unique fantasy universe. It will debut with a gacha-style RPG, and will be announced at either Gamescom or E3 next year. BlizzCon Online 2022 has been cancelled, but I'm certain you've already guessed that. All right, like the idea of them making a new IP, considering the fact that people are no longer interested in Sylvanas, Tracer, and Kerrigan. Yeah, people are no longer interested in Sylvanas, Tracer, and Kerrigan. To be fair, Kerrigan never really was the main character of StarCraft. If there's ever been considered the main character, that would be Raynor. To be clear on that, Blizzard forced what Blizzard, especially after what Blizzard did with Kerrigan. Yeah, if you're telling me people have a good opinion of Kerrigan, no, they do not. Considering how the story of StarCraft 2 was handled, people don't have an interest in Kerrigan and Sylvanas because the story of those characters has been horribly handled. So yeah, people no longer have an interest, not because they're not capable of capturing modern audiences, but rather, or capture people's imaginations, but rather because the characters themselves have been written very badly. Sylvanas has been, Kerrigan has been, and Tracer, no one really cares about Tracer when people no longer care about Overwatch. We'll see what ends up happening, but according to this leak, it's something already being worked on. The future doesn't look particularly bright in some ways, I gotta say. It's like a lot of mobile stuff by looks of it, at least according to this post. A lot of questionable mechanics, questionable decisions. As I said, I think this is fake, but certainly some of these things could be realistic. Some of these things could have some actual value. It could be seen as actual decisions that Activision would be willing to make. We'll see what ends up happening. Kostyan here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.